Yeah, we'll see what ends up happening. We got Cayden Steele from NJ.com in the green room. We're going to bring up Cayden now. Let's go to our friend NJ from NJ.com. Cayden Steele joining us now. Cayden, how you doing, man? Welcome to the show. Good to have you here on this Monday. Thanks for being here.
Doing great, doing great. Thanks, guys, for having me today.
Yeah, good to see you, Cayden. Your namesake is here, Cayden Stearns. We'll talk about him, but exciting to get another Cayden in Philadelphia. I do want to talk about the offense first. If you heard what I was saying there, 11 yards. That was the extent of the stretching of the field in Baltimore. Now, the Eagles' backup receivers aren't great. Backup quarterbacks. Kenny Pickett's not known for being Brett Favre, but still, 11 yards. And they had a couple, Kellen Moore pointed out, they had a couple shots about 15 yards that weren't successful. I don't know. I'm thinking about camp, and I take that over to camp. And have they been more conservative than you expected?
I haven't really thought about it that way when it comes to the preseason game, at least when just watching the offense and their lack of ability to get down the field. I morally blame that, or not blame that, but kind of thought about it in the way just because they have Johnny Wilson and Britton Covey and those guys as their top wide receivers, and they're not exactly field stretchers. So I didn't think about it in that way. But within training camp practices, it's not like they're taking a ton of long shots. I think morally the offense has done a better job of throwing the ball to the middle of the field from what I've noticed. But a lot of it has been more short and stuff on to the flat and stuff in the middle more than stretching, deep balls down the sideline. But I'm not sure I read too much into it. I still think they will be explosive at the end of the day because, like you mentioned, John, they'll have A.J. Brown, they'll have Devontae Smith. So if they play conservative and they don't really stretch the field and attack the field, I mean, that would be a disappointing thing from, Kellen Moore when you have all those different talents. So not too worried about it, but I mean, you never know, I guess.
Cayden, what's been your takeaway so far? We're 11 practices deep. We're one preseason game. I guess we can start with the preseason game. What were your big takeaways? Any players that stood out to you in that game? Any guys that are lower roster guys that you're like, wow, they might have an impact on this football team this year, or if not this year, in the future? Who stood out to you in the game on Friday?
At first, I mean, it might be the easy answer, but thought the corners looked pretty good for the most part. I'm not going to say they were perfect because they gave up some catches early, but Keely Ringo had a really, I think, solid night, especially with just drawing the ball out a couple times. Seems like he's definitely farther ahead than he was last year. I thought he played well. I think Quinnen, played really well, and that's a player that you have to be excited about. Not only on Friday night, almost finishing with an interception, and I thought it was interesting. Nick mentioned it. Other than, I guess, that one play, he wasn't really noticeable. But I mean, that's not a bad thing. He was saying, like, you don't want rookie corners to be guys.
That's a good thing for a corner.
Yeah. So I thought he looked good. I mean, I thought Isaiah was pretty solid for the most part, and all three of those guys have been having strong training camp. So if you're an Eagles fan that dreaded watching the secondary last year, and there's still a chance that during the year they have some ups and downs. It's a pretty relatively new unit, other than Darius Slay, but they look pretty strong overall. I thought the linebackers played pretty well. I thought Nakobe looked good from, I wasn't sure what to expect because I think he's been one of the more disappointing players in training camp so far, but he had a really strong game, and so did Jeremiah Trotter Jr., and I wasn't sure what to expect of him this year, but finished with a sack. He just didn't look out of place, played good on special teams as well. Overall, I think it was a really strong performance from the linebackers, especially these guys on it looks like the second unit, and then the corners.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I was saying about the linebackers, Cayden. The backup linebackers played really well, and I would add Ben Van Sumeren to that list as well. The starting linebackers, what was that? What was that, Cayden? And they're not out there again. It was interesting to me that Bick kind of went all Bick when I asked him about Nakobe yesterday and Ben and Trot. And he said, yeah, they played well, but you got to temper that a little bit because they're against second and third team players, which he's right. Devin White and Zach Baldwin played poorly, against second-team players. Lamar Jackson wasn't out there. Derrick Henry wasn't out there. The vast majority of our offensive line wasn't out there. What are we doing here with these linebackers, Cayden?
Yeah, I got no clue. I mean, I did find it funny that Vic said, "Oh, Zach, he played pretty good besides like messing up multiple times." So it wasn't like he was very effusive in his praise necessarily. Like, I mean, I appreciate Vic's honesty. A compliment sometimes comes with a backhand one.
Oh yeah,
sometimes with Vic, which is
Alex Hunt got one of those too. By the way,
yes, he did. But yeah, the linebacker position, I don't think. I mean, in practice, I mean, consistently, and in the preseason game, it's Devin White and Zach Bond lining up with the first team. So it seems like Vic has the most amount of trust in those guys. And I'm not sure, at least maybe for Devin White, it's because he's played a ton of football in the NFL, and that could be the reason why. Zach Bond is an interesting case because he hasn't been a full-time starter ever. He's never been a truly impactful player at the inside linebacker spot, or he's been a rotational edge / outside linebacker. He put a little inside linebacker with the Saints, but there's nothing from his career that would make you believe that he's definitely going to step up and be a really good player here. But something Vic has seen, and he talked about yesterday, there was a few plays that I guess he saw with the Saints, so he felt like Zach could do it. Maybe with time and a couple more weeks into the season, because this is still relatively new for him, maybe he'll end up being better. But I gotta agree with you that they weren't the most impressive players. And then at the same time, I give credit to Nakobe, but I mean, you still have to be able to cover in this league, and I didn't see it. I mean, we haven't seen that much in training camp. I don't know if the game necessarily gave him many tests in that area, and I think he's great when he's going downhill. Yeah. And there's a fit for that. I mean, there's a role for that on this defense as a third linebacker who can blitz, and I think he could be a productive player in that role. But if you can't cover, I'm just not sure what his ceiling is. And then at the end of the day, Jeremiah Trotter Jr. might have potential, but there's a reason he went in the 5th round, and he's a rookie. So, like, this linebacker group, I don't know if you could feel good about. You mentioned Ben Van Sumeren has all the athleticism in the world. How is he progressing when it comes to everything else? That would be interesting to watch. But this linebacker group, we talked about this defense, and I'm excited about the secondary. Linebacker group, I'm pretty concerned about, though.
How about the edge rushers, Cayden? We've talked a lot about the linebackers today. I've been pushing on Johnny Mack, where I'm like, what's going on with Bryce Huff? Where's he been? Any concern on the edge rushers coming into the year?
Yeah, well, I'll say this, and Bryce Huff hasn't been noticeable to me, and maybe that's I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. I really don't want to overreact, because at the end of the day, he's going against Lane Johnson and Jordan Mailata every single day in practice. Yes. And
I never noticed Hassan Reddick at practice.
Yeah,
for the same reason.
Edge rushers are tougher in general, I feel like, to notice at practice. I mean, unless they're going full out, like they're not bringing the quarterback down on the ground. Like, it's tough to read into Bryce Huff right now. But I mean, he hasn't flashed, and I think that's more to do with Lane and Jordan Mailata. So I don't know what to feel about it. I think we're not going to really know until the regular season starts how good Bryce Huff is. Week 1 against Green Bay and week 2 against Atlanta, I think we'll start to find out more. So right now, I think he's more of a mystery than anything. But I thought Josh Sweat and Nolan Smith and Brandon Graham, those guys have done decent. But overall as a group, I don't think they've necessarily been dominant to any certain extent. But I mean, like, it's tough to read edge rushers at practice.
Yeah, and Bryce only played five snaps in Baltimore, so he was barely out there. Yeah, we'll see. I mean, maybe I'm too high on Bryce Huff, but I kind of know he's going to be able to rush the passer. Yeah. Maybe not against Lane Johnson, but he doesn't have to play against Lane Johnson.
And not many people are able to, rush
exactly.
against Micah Parsons.
Exactly. So I bring up all the time. Nick Bosa.
Yeah.
You would think Nick Bosa stinks if you put on his Lane Johnson tape.
Yeah. So I wouldn't buy into the Bryce Huff is struggling thing. I would for now, I would take it more as the Lane Johnson thing. If it's in the regular season and we see something that's different than what we saw in New York as a pass rusher, then I'd be concerned. But for now, it's just the classic case of Lane Johnson's just too good.
Yeah, I'm with you. That's exactly what I bring up constantly on this show. And I went back and I asked a bunch of guys specifically about Hassan, because you forget, you go through one training camp, you go to the next, and it's such a grind and it's always moving. And I was like, I don't remember Hassan really splashing in practice. And most people agreed with me. And he was just fine when the real bullets started to fly, so to speak. But offensively, they kind of piecemealed it. I thought they might do this and say, well, the defense needs some more work, so they might play. And the offense is like, it's going to be good. It's just a matter of how good. And they ended up playing it cautious. I think the weather played into it, the wet field, even though it broke and it was pretty nice night overall, except for the humidity. Did you want to say, are you one of those that believes you need to get some reps, preseason reps?
I see the reasoning why, especially if you start off slow at the gates, and maybe you could say last year because of how they practice and the lack of reps in preseason, maybe they were not ready for the year, and that's why they broke down. But I'm not necessarily a believer in that. I'm more of a believer in you have star players on offense, and the best thing that can come out of a training camp is not necessarily an amazing performance by them or a great slate of preseason games. Is coming away healthy with most of your pieces before the season starts. So it really doesn't bother me that they didn't get reps. And I think that Patriots game, or not the Patriots game, but the Patriots joint practice this week serves pretty much as one preseason game for them, which I think at the end of the day, that's all they were going to get. And maybe they would have played a few plays against the Ravens, but this week against New England in this joint practice will be where they are able to kind of, get the most ready. And I'm fine with that. I think joint practices served well. I think preseason games are better, for the second and third string guys kind of trying to prove themselves. So I don't think it necessarily will impact the chemistry of this offense necessarily.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Johnny Mac.
Yeah, I'm with you. Now, getting back to the offensive perspective of not pushing the football down the field, because I'm not concerned about it, but I am starting to think, and we talk about this stretch, and we're at 11 practices now where Jaylen Herz hasn't thrown an interception. Now, on the surface, that's great, Cayden. But if it's great because it's all checkdowns and it's all over the middle, as you mentioned, is that an overcorrection of what went wrong last year when they were trying to push the football down the field, when they fell in love with the big play versus, all right, let's, because training camps where you should be pressing things and saying, oh, can I make this throw? And generally you have more interception. You can go on X today and you'll see practices around the league. Interception. Everybody gets upset by it, but who cares? You're working on things. Counterintuitively, is that a bad thing that he has no interceptions?
It feels weird to say it's a bad thing because I'll say this. I don't think it's a bad or a good thing. I don't get the whole is so many days he's thrown an interception. I don't think it really matters that in any regard, whether you're perfect in training camp or you're not perfect in training camp. I think that's maybe one of the most overrated things that we look into. But when it comes to an offense, maybe there is some overcorrection because the big complaint, last year with Nick Sirianni's offensive scheme and was that they were too vertical and they were trying to stretch the field too much and they weren't really using all different areas of the field in the middle of the field and just they weren't attacking pretty much. They were, very basically just running 4 verts and going down the field. So maybe there is some overcorrection to that, but I don't know. I do think maybe they're playing it slightly conservative and they could test it a little more, but I think Jalen's played well so far, though. I mean, I think he's looked accurate. He's made some really good throws. I don't know. It will be interesting. I'm not really sure if Kellen Moore's showing his hand yet necessarily. He's very close
Yeah.
to the vest. I mean, he talks about his philosophies during the press conference, but he doesn't talk a ton about personnel. And right now, I think we're only
No.
seeing a tiny bit of what Kellen Moore will do. And
Well, there's a lot of expectations, though, and from the standpoint, because you and I were standing together for a while yesterday, and we were going back and forth on how many stinking pre-snap penalties there were, because there
yeah,
were a boatload yesterday, and I think everybody's excited about the motion and all the new stuff and all the eye candy and the eye wash and this and that, and that's great. And the Orban, and then people are jumping on, they're jumping early. Should be getting better at this point. And they had a real step back when it came to that yesterday.
yeah, it was definitely a sloppy day. And I would say the offense just from a whole yesterday, it's not like when they weren't getting penalized, I thought things were moving pretty decently. But I mean, they're consistently shooting themselves in the foot yesterday with pre-snap penalty or just I don't know if it was some of it was definitely some form of illegal formation, some false starts, and that comes with a new offense in some regard, like you said, and John with Kellen Moore coming in. Last year they weren't doing a lot of this, pre-snap movement with motion and stuff. Some of the stuff in the communication is probably definitely, especially up front with Cam Jurgens taking over center and Mekhi Becton now at right guard. There seems like there could be some, there's still some areas to work on there. And we talk all along about how great the playmakers are with AJ and Devontae and Saquon and Dallas Goedert. And you have good, strong offensive line play and a good quarterback play. But if you're continually being sloppy, which, at the end of the day, we go back to last season. And yeah, some of it had to do with the play calling, but we forget to look at, some of these players on this offense last year, no matter how much talent they have, underperformed. And and there was sloppy. And if that continues into the season, it doesn't matter how much talent you have. They just got to be more crisp if they're going to reach their potential. And it's not a guarantee that necessarily Kellen Moore comes in and all of a sudden the light changes and they go from the 7th best offense back to being a top 2 offense again. So
we'll see. Cayden, I want to ask you about running back Saquon Barkley and what you've seen of him so far in training camp. How has he stood out to you, if at all? And how do you think he's going to be used in the offense this year?
Yes, Saquon's been interesting because again, it's tough. It's similar to Bryce, where I feel like he stood out a little more, but I don't think I've watched Saquon Barkley in practice, been like, oh wow, he's been earth shattering or anything. But at the same time, it's practice. They're not tackling to the ground. He didn't play in the preseason game, but he looks explosive when he's gotten some carries, and I think he's looked solid. He's one of those players again, though. I don't think we'll really see it until the regular season begins. But when the regular season does begin, I think he's going to have a bigger role in the offense. You didn't give him. Howie Roseman hasn't given a running back a 3-year deal very often. That's not what they do. So obviously, Kellen Moore has some plan for Saquon, and I think he'll get a large portion of the carries. I think he'll be involved more in the passing game. It seems like the running backs at least want that, and Kellen has talked about that.
Well, it's funny. They get Kenny involved. They get Will involved.
Not as much.
They don't really get Saquon involved.
I don't know what it is. It's tough because I want to say whether he stand out or he hasn't stand out, Xander, but he hasn't been it feels like he hasn't been a huge part of the offense in practice necessarily, but I'm not sure why that is or how that will change when the regular season comes. I still think Saquon Barkley is going to be a big part of the offense, and I believe that he has a ton of talent. If he didn't lose a step from everything that he went through in New York with the injuries, and that's still, I guess, a little bit of a question mark. How much juice does he have left? If he still has it, I think he'll be a big-time player for the Eagles. But in training camp, it's been tough to kind of see how his role will be just from a definite perspective, I guess.
Ultimately, Cayden, I think the Eagles are going to go outside the organization and bring in another wide receiver at some point. But if they don't, who's your guy? Who's your guy, wide receiver 3? Who are you going with?
Yeah, well, it's not great. You mentioned the preseason game, and the reason they probably weren't able to get down the field very often, and they weren't having much offensive success just in general, is because the depth of the wide receiver. We talk about all the position groups on this team, and from a front line perspective, wide receiver is probably the best. You have 2 stars.
Yeah,
But from a depth perspective of any position on this team, the wide receiver is the worst. If you knock on one, hopefully for them, that AJ or Devontae does not get hurt. Because if they do, this passing offense is going to be in trouble. So I agree with you, John. They're going to have to go outside probably to fill it. But if some reason Howie Roseman doesn't do that, surprisingly, it's tough. I mean, I would go with Brett and Covey, I guess, because
same here. Yeah,
I have 2 things I feel confident of. I feel like Britton can get open, at least underneath. I think he's got enough quick, jitter to get underneath and be a possession wide receiver. And 2, I feel like not only is a punt returner, but from what I've seen in practice, he will secure the ball. He's pretty safe at catching it, which, look, I've liked what I've seen from Johnny Wilson. Some parts of his game, I can't get over the fact that, in a good way, that he's 6'7". I mean, you can't teach size and athleticism, and I think he has some tools to work with, and they seem to trust him more than I thought they would from him as a rookie. They like him, but I don't know about the hands. I mean, he had drops in college. He really struggled with that at Florida State.
And he was bobbling the ball yesterday.
Yes.
You saw it. You know,
Yes.
I think everybody. I read a couple guys, and they said, "Oh, Wilson made some nice guys." And Michael Clay and Joe P were back there saying, he bobbled it going to the ground.
Yeah, I guess it's up to the judgment whether you catch it, but whether it was a catch or not, it wasn't clean though. Even if he pulled it in and they did a
Definitely
review,
wasn't clean.
Yeah, so that part would concern me, and the fact that he's a rookie and like you want to put him in big situations. I know that, and I do think to a certain extent the third wide receiver is a little overblown. You don't need a guy to go out there and get you 60 catches. I mean,
perfectly.
If you could go back to 2022, I thought Quez did a nice job in what his role was as a guy who stretched the field and opened up space for AJ and Devontae. Obviously, Quez regressed last year and got hurt, and just like it didn't work. But do you want to put a rookie in that situation where you have to count on him and he drops passes in big games? I'm not sure if you want to give him the full workload of a number 3 wide receiver. If there's a package for him, I think that's fine. I do think he has potential. This is nothing against Johnny Wilson, because I think he's been more impressive than I thought he would be.
Yeah.
But
it's a 6th-round pick. It's fine. I mean, he's going to make the team. I can't say that about Anais Smith. So
yeah, I agree with you on that one.
Yeah. But so it was Johnny Wilson, it was Joe Nada, and it was John Ross. And I already put Nate Wiggins down as a all-pro cornerback because he shot all 3. He was in the hip of all 3, which is and Nate's a rookie for those who don't know. Obviously, late first round pick, but boy, he really had an easy time with those guys. And yeah, I think Howie's got to go outside the organization. But you're right in the fact that it doesn't even matter if AJ and Devontae stay healthy. It doesn't matter.
No,
but there's no bigger drop off between the starters and the backups on this team than wide receiver.
Yeah, and I agree, because you look at most other positions. I'm going to exclude quarterback, but I mean, I feel confident about the backups in the secondary, the D linemen, even. Like, I feel good about guys like, he's not necessarily backup, but guys like Mitt Williams. I feel good about the depth overall. But the wide receiver position, and you mentioned it's funny about the Nate Wiggins. I mean, Ravens Twitter thinks he's a Hall of Famer from locking up 3.
I know.
But
he looked like a Hall of Famer. That's the point.
Yeah, it just, if that happens, though, they are in trouble. I agree. They're gonna have to get someone out there that is a quality number 3 wide receiver. You at least hope maybe you can find that in a trade in the next few weeks. I'm not sure who they would look at. I mean, you would have to go to a team with a really deep wide receiver core and a guy who's going to be out of man out. I don't know if you go look to a team like Houston maybe or San Francisco, like a guy that's going to be their number 5 or 6 wide receiver or being in danger of getting cut. And you're going to have to hope that you can get him for a late round pick and that he can produce because, yeah, I mean, maybe we're discounting Britton Covey to a certain extent because
I'm not. I just think I think Britton would do a good job being, as you said, it's a certain type. He's going to be a possession receiver, middle of the field guy, but he can create separation. He can do some things on those bubble screens. He can make the first guy miss. Just a solid player. And you don't need a lot of traffic, but I don't think the Eagles believe in him because he doesn't have versatility. He's obviously very undersized. Devontae plays in the slot. AJ will play in the slot more with Kellen Moore. And they want somebody who's able to move around more so he can do more different things with AJ and Devontae.
And yeah, I guess, that's also part of it is if one of those guys go down, even though Britton, I think, would be fine within that role. I mean, like you said, he doesn't really have the versatility to go outside because of the size. And they might want to, I mean, they're going to need a guy if injuries happen to replace AJ's and Devontae's role. And they don't necessarily have that guy. I would feel really good if Britton Covey and Johnny Wilson were my wide receivers 5 and 6. And I had a 3 and 4 that were a little bit different. And then guys like, I mean, frankly, Anaya Smith and John Ross and not looking, great. Paris Campbell with the injury. I mean, he's the guy that I guess most people thought would be wide receiver 3, but with him missing this time and he wasn't really standing out in practice to begin with. And he wasn't good in New York last year. And he's got a great story. And you want to root for a guy like that, but he's not helping his case right now with the past injuries. And now he's injured again. And I guess he's got familiarity, that relationship with Knicks, and maybe that buys him time to get back, to make the roster still, but I can't rely on him right now either. So,
yeah.
Cayden, another guy I want to ask about, it's tough we talk about the wide receiver 3 and I keep going. The only thing I think about in my head is I got Devontae, I got AJ, I got Saquon Barkley, I got Dallas Goedert. Like, what about Dallas Goedert? What's his role going to be on this offense? Because he's another great player, but you wonder how much is he going to get the ball, or how much are the options in front of him going to get the ball? What's your projection for Dallas Goedert this year? What do you think he's going to be for this team?
Yeah, he looked amazing on the open practice. He got 3 touchdowns and in the red zone, and he was dominating. I don't know if he'll be to that certain extent, but there's a chance maybe they'll try to use him in the red zone more this year. I mean, he talked about it a little bit in his presser, I think this past week. He's a really good player. The big thing for him is, one, he has to share targets with AJ and Devontae. So from that perspective, I think naturally his production from a statistical perspective for himself is never going to be up there of past 1,000 yards or anything like that. But I think he could have a big role in this offense. And in all reality, he's the third. Whether you want to think maybe they'll involve Saquon more in the passing game, we'll see about that. But right now, he's the third guy in this passing game. I think he'll be really productive. I think he's going to have a big role, especially if they're going to want to stretch just use advantage or take advantage of more parts of the field. They're going to target the middle of the field more. And if that happens, from what we've seen in practice, Dallas is going to be a bigger part of that. It's just for him, it's just to stay healthy. And I know the last 2 years he's gotten injured with some freaky injuries. Like Washington had his face mask ripped off of his face. Last year against Dallas as well, it was a freaky injury. So it's not like Dallas has got these lingering hamstring injuries or something that's been holding him out.
Don't forget the broken glenoid bone in Chicago. We looked at that and said, what glenoid? Nobody ever heard of glenoid. And he's got the
worst luck.
Yeah, he did that as well. I think part of it is he plays so physically, like when he was with the forearm injury. He's just he's knocking defenders on the ground and maybe he needs to be a little bit more cautious. But that's just not how he plays the game. At Cayden _ Steele19. Make sure you follow Cayden on X, Twitter. Read him at NJ.com with our buddies Chris Franklin and Bob Brookover as well. Does a tremendous job there. He'll be covering the Eagles on a day-to-day basis this year. So get used to Cayden. He's doing a good job, and I'll leave it. The Caydens of the world. Now, Cayden Stern spells it differently. Do you stick together? The Caydens of the world. Are you excited by Cayden Stern?
I guess to a certain extent, I never thought I would cover another Cayden. It's not like I haven't throughout my life run through or gotten to know a lot of people that are a Cayden. It's happened once in a while, but it's not like a common occurrence. So to have that in the locker room this year, we'll see if he makes the roster. He's got to get healthy first. But I mean,
he was limping, by the way.
He was. He had the sleeve on the leg yesterday. But yeah, I'm excited to cover him. I mean, I'm a Cayden myself. Tore both my ACLs in high school, so I have a Cayden with some injury.
There we go. Lots in common.
With some injury history, so we might be able to bond a little bit. But yeah, I think it's cool. And at the end of the day, I think he's a player that at the beginning of his career was a pretty solid third safety for Denver. They really liked him. Vic liked him.
Yeah.
He played well, obviously. Playing I forget the exact number, 5 or 6 games within the last 2 years is not ideal, but if he's in the locker room, and introduce myself and same first name, so this should be good.
Good stuff, Cayden. Thanks for joining the show, man. We appreciate you being here. Great insights. We're happy to have you on the Eagles beat this year. We look forward to talking to you all year long. So thanks for joining us today, man. We'll catch up with you soon. All right.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
Thanks,
There's Cayden Steele joining us on Birds 365. Great stuff from Cayden Steele. Who's been down at practice and down at the training camp. And he's one of their main guys now, right, at NJ.com covering this football team. Is that correct?
Yeah. Him and Brookie are going to do the Eagles, and Chris is moving to more of a general thing where he's going to cover some Giants, some Eagles, some whatever else they cover at NJ.com. So, Cayden's the new guy, but he's doing a good job.
Doing a great job. I want to thank everybody for being here. Almost 160 likes on the show today. Thank you all for the likes. Let's try and get to close to 200 likes. We got over 400 watching on YouTube. Appreciate all you guys being here. We're going to take one more commercial break. And then on the way out the door, I got a question for Johnny Mack as we go into maybe what's the most important day of the summer, right? When you think about a joint practice and you're not playing versus your own team and it's not a preseason game, is it fair to say it's one of the most important days of the offseason?
Yeah, it is. I mean, but I don't want to
practice part of it.
I don't want to overstate it to that degree. But I mean, it is going to be a test for the starters against another team, which is important. I prefer we're 2 days where you can kind of, get a bigger feel. So one day is kind of hurt. And then let's be honest, New England's not New England. So I think there's going to be some excitement. It's not a very good team right now, certainly offensively. So I think the defense is going to look a little bit better. Probably a bigger test for the offensive guys for 2 reasons. One, they're not going to play in the preseason. And because they're so good offensively, and they do have a pretty good defense, or at least projected to have a pretty good defense.
We'll see how it goes. Let's take our last commercial break. If you're in that chat, drop that like button. Any questions you got in there, drop them. We'll try and hit them on the way out the door today. Just 8 minutes left to go. Appreciate everybody being here. Stay tuned. Birds 365 will be right back.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.